So again, by way of reminder for those who weren't here and review for those who are, the makeup for the various classes that we've missed, including this one if you're not here, is on TWEN. So we have the handouts here and the handout links. There's a folder here for the class that's entirely online. The recordings, of course, for Friday's class and for today's class is on the home page of TWEN. And for the class that's entirely online, the makeup, I'm asking you to do several different parts. I send out the email to you. It's also set forth here on the home page of TWEN. And the instructions for signing up for the Lexis Learn modules, which is the first part of that, are also available in the handouts link as well as the screencasts link. And I know this is a whole lot and a little bit jumbled for now. Read through what's on TWEN. If you're still at all confused, don't hesitate to email me, or if you find me, ask me, and I will be happy to help you out with whatever is causing confusion. And as I was telling Marianne, I am here all next week. So if for whatever reason you decide you want to do this on spring break, not that I am advocating that by any stretch, I will be here to answer your questions. Okay, the other thing I wanted to mention, again, with all of the scheduling complications that occurred, including my own, I have decided to increase what I like to call the get out of jail free for missing a class to 2 classes rather than 1. Folks have had the flu, we've had snow days, I've had my circumstances, we now have interviews going on. So for those of you who have been dedicated and attended all class, I will make sure that that gets reflected elsewhere in your class participation. So you will get credit for that for sure. And for those of you who are unable, for whatever the reasons just mentioned, as I said, you'll have an extra get out of jail free. The other thing I have done, if you choose, and again I mentioned this on Friday, so sorry to those who, for this is a repeat, on assignment 4, which is now available online, I distributed it on Friday, there is an extra credit question if you'd like to earn some extra credit points. It is entirely extra credit. If you don't want to do it, there's absolutely no penalty to that. Speaking of assignments, what I would like to do before we continue on with the substantive material is to talk a little bit about some of the issues that came up in your assignments as I was going through them that caused confusion for a number of people. I find typically when a number of people make the same mistake, there may be some confusion that's worth clarifying. So one concept I introduced, and it's kind of a funky phrase, and I don't know that you're going to hear it much outside of this class, but that is statutory scheme. And it's a funky phrase, but it's a really, really important concept. So I don't care if you remember the phrase. In fact, I don't know that I'm going to use it again, but you really, really want to remember the concept. And the concept is where in the subject hierarchy your particular statute section appears. So here we are looking at section 350 of the New York statutes, McKinney's, false advertising unlawful, and I had asked in the assignment what the statutory scheme was. And what I meant by that and what the importance of the concept is, it's that it is, yes, within the general business law. Some of you thought just McKinney's. It's in the general business law, but within the general business law, it's in this article, Consumer Protection for Deceptive Acts. So you want to look at the context of your section to make sure that that's relevant to your issue, because you will find the terms false advertising in other section names in New York statutes that have nothing to do with your client's issue. So does everybody understand that concept of statutory scheme? Again, the words aren't important, the name isn't important, the concept of the subject in which your section appears is extraordinarily important. Okay. With regard to assignment 3, legislative history, I will be getting that back to you very soon. A couple of people, well, more than a couple of people were a little confused about, come on in, we're just getting started. If you missed Friday, Here are extra copies. If you were here on Friday and you were here, you don't need to worry about it.
They have to add these things to the...
Okay, we'll pass this around again. So with regard to assignment 3, a number of people, when I asked the question toward the end of what are the documents that will best reflect congressional intent, a bunch of people just listed all the documents they saw or they weren't quite sure. And what you want to try to remember is if you are looking for congressional intent, the reports are going to be the first place to go. It may not be the last place because you may not find what you're looking for, but the first place you want to look at are the committee reports, and the committee reports include the conference report. The other area of confusion had to do with using Westlaw for legislative history, so I'm going to show you where I think the confusion was. And I'm pulling up our section for which I asked you to look at the legislative history. So here's section 343, misbranded food, and again the context of that section, the statutory scheme comes under food and within the FDA Act. So what you want to do ideally is if you have a legislative intent question, the first place to go is to figure out which public law enacted the language that you're interested in, and to do that, we go to the editors and revisers notes, and to get to those notes, you need to scroll down till you see amendments, and then you read through and determine which of these amendments adopted the language of interest. It may be, if you don't see it here, you have to go to your original enacting public law, or if you do see it here, for instance, I asked you about Public Law 105-115. Ideally, what you want to do once you find it, if you have the link like we do here, you can click on the Public Law 105-115 here. Another place to get to it, again in the original, is we always look for our public laws in our section 343, scrolling down to the bottom to credits. You can find it in the credit statement here, and so you can click on it here. And once here, you can go to the Legislative History Materials tab, and what you will see is the listing of those documents that Westlaw has for that particular public law. Where people got confused, I'm guessing, because obviously I didn't see what you did, but where people got confused is instead of clicking on the public law and looking at the Legislative History Materials tab, what they did is they, looking at section 343, and again, I'm guessing that this is what you did, I can't be sure, but when looking at section 343 here, folks went to the History tab and went to the Legislative History link here, and that's fine as long as you understand what you're looking at. Again, bibliographic awareness, you understand this is the Legislative History Materials for all of the public laws that amended 343. So we have this Public Law 111-148. And if we scroll past all that stuff, we'll get the next one. This is a long one, so we'll get the next one, 109-462. If you're interested in 105-115, you need to scroll down, or as I like to do, Control F. So you get to, and sometimes it jumps over, which I don't know why it does that, but so you need to scroll down until you get to 105-115, and then you see those legislative history documents for that public law. So again, it's easier to get confused linking to the overall legislative history materials. If you go directly to the public law and then go to legislative history, you get just what you need. Okay. And that's all I have to say about this assignments. Again, other than I didn't mention, or I'll mention again, assignment 4, which got distributed, I extended the due date from what was listed on the syllabus to Friday, April 6th. Just with all the craziness that's going on, I figured you all could use an extra few days. If you don't want those extra few days, that's fine too. Send it to me when you are done. But everybody now has until April 6th. Okay, the other thing I wanted to review before we go into new material is a little bit of the substance of what we did on Friday, and that has to do with case research. I really wanted to have an in-class makeup because doing case research is so important, so I thought it'd be worthwhile to go over that material again. And for those of you who weren't here, you hopefully picked up, or I'll send this around, the most important one of these pieces of paper, or again, these are all handouts, are also on the handouts link on Twen, is this techniques for finding cases. I tried to spell out in one page how you would go about using the various tools that are available to you on the online services. And the really, really useful ones are on, well, I think honestly the really, really useful ones are on Westlaw, and I would like to review those. So basically, what we talked about on Friday were a couple of different techniques, and you'll want to go into more detail. Again, listen to the class recording if you haven't already. If you have, fantastic. So one technique is what we librarians like to call the one good case technique. It's basically if you've already found a case from whatever sources you have, secondary sources, Google, whatever, and you are looking at that case to take advantage of what Lexis and Westlaw mostly provide for you in terms of topical subject analysis. And they're called headnotes, basically on all three services. The systems that they use are slightly different. It's kind of like Coke and Pepsi, different formulas, but the function's the same. And again, for more detail on why it's so useful, go back to the recording. But in using these headnotes, there are a couple of different ways you can find other cases on the same topic. So here in the Aetna case, we've seen Aetna referred to in various secondary sources. If you go to the Aetna case, you will find these headnotes that talk about points of law that might be relevant to our client. To use these headnotes to find other cases on that same topic of law, it's pretty easy just to click on whichever link you think is the most relevant for your client. So if we decide healthcare benefits is the most relevant, we click on this number link. And what that does is that lists for us other cases with that same headnote. But notice that it's within the jurisdiction we just came from. So Aetna was in the Supreme Court, so it's giving us the Supreme Court. Of course, we want to go to our own jurisdiction and not limit to just the Supreme Court. So we would choose either whatever jurisdictions we want. Maybe if we want to be very broad, we'd go all state and all federal. Again, it depends on your issue and where you are in your research. So limiting by jurisdiction, we now have a list of 62 cases using this particular headnote on insurance, talking about healthcare benefits within this hierarchy. Again, that context, that hierarchy of topic is always useful to take a look at. So we're talking about insurance, preemption, what law governs, and healthcare benefits, which sounds pretty relevant for our client. And here are those cases. And again, what this is showing us are the different cases with that same insurance headnote. And what you can do from here is search within results. So that's tool number one. My all-time favorite tool, tool number 2, as listed on your handout, or B, is use the key number filter. And the reason that's my favorite is that even if you don't have a useful case, you can use this. So if we do what is now at least my favorite search, liability HMO, I'm going to keep it limited to New York here just for the moment. But again, always good to be bibliographically aware and aware of what I'm searching. So we do our search, and looking here at my search, I'm going to limit to cases because, of course, we're talking about cases. And once I do that, I can then use my filters to limit further. And honestly, I think this tool number 2 is the most powerful one you can use. And that's to use the filter for, again, the key numbers. And the best way for me to show you what this is and why it's useful is just to show you. So under key number, under select, I take a look at the different topics. So I know, for instance, as I've been doing the research, I'm interested in insurance, but insurance is way too broad for our client, right? So if I click on it, I can narrow it down, and maybe I've done some research, I'm interested in what law governs, so maybe I want to narrow that down further, and I want to say preemption, and I might just add preemption. But as they, I think, say on late night TV, I don't stay up late enough anymore to really confirm that anymore. I can say, but wait, there's more. So I can go back home here and add another key number. So I might have noticed in Aetna the health topic, or I might have run across it in some of my other research. So I can, again, add the entire health topic if I want to, or I can drill down. Maybe I want to add malpractice, negligence, or breach of duty. So I'll click on Add, and then when I'm happy with my list here, I go to Continue, and then in Westlaw, as I always need to do, I need to tell it to apply filters. And so now it is filtered to cases that have those headnotes. So again, I'm taking my keyword search, and then I'm narrowing it by the topic of what my client's issue is. Now, you're not always going to want to do this. As we've discussed many times, sometimes a keyword search is going to be just fine. There is no reason to always do this. This is when the keyword search isn't just fine, or it needs some narrowing. And again, with another way to narrow either with this or without this, again, is the search within results. So I can do a very targeted, powerful search using these different tools. Okay, and last but not least, the equivalent on Lexis, I will review with everybody quickly. Now, unfortunately, there's no great equivalent to that second tool I showed you, but the equivalent to the first tool, Lexis also has headnotes. I clicked on the wrong link there, bear with me. I don't know why that's not coming up. So let's try that again. All right, it helps to bring up the right case. Now that we're in the right case. So again, we find a case, and Lexis, like Westlaw, has headnotes. They look a whole lot different. Again, different formulas like Coke and Pepsi. And to use Lexis's particular formula, again, you find a headnote of interest. You can view it in the topic index to get a sense of the context. That might get a little confusing for you. So I know I've listed that step, and it's a good step to look at. But if you really just want to look at the documents, then you do what it says and you get the documents. And again, you get other cases that use that headnote. You can limit by jurisdiction. You can search within results. Again, the filters that we have talked about in the past in other contexts. So those are the highlights of what we talked about on Friday in terms of Lexis and Westlaw. Again, for those of you who have not done so and weren't here, please look at the recording. The other thing I wanted to go over, because honestly, when I left class on Friday, for those of you who were here, I still felt like there was some confusion with regard to the issue spotting. So I thought it would be worthwhile to review it here, and also for the benefit of the folks who weren't here. So I put up a little bit of what I remember from what we had on the board in terms of issue spotting in my lovely handwriting there. And what I wanted to start the conversation doing is asking those of you who were here, because I know there was a little bit of confusion, and actually Amy was wonderfully generous in sharing with me where she was a little bit confused, and her confusion, I hope you don't mind my saying, which is totally understand, was a little bit more in the process of we had come up with a couple of questions, and my intent was to have you all think about what made the most sense, and I think some of you just took what I had on the board, which I need to be more careful about. So that was one area of confusion. For those of you who were here who had a little bit of confusion identifying the topic, do you remember what confused you?
I think not recognizing that if you're not getting something where you know it should be there, it's because the verbiage is just not connected. In other words, we were looking up malpractice and legal duty, and knowing that something should be there but not finding relevant things. It did not dawn on. I just kept searching other ways of saying the same thing as specific, rather than taking a step back and saying, all right, the keyword here might have been research or knowledge, which was almost basic.
Okay, I should also fill those of you who weren't here. Our question was, as a lawyer, can you be sued if you forget to update, oh, I should do my update, and the law you relied on is superseded? Actually, I'll pass around these extra copies of the workshop because if we have time at the end, we'll work on that. So we did our standard issue spotting, and these are some of the terms that came up. And actually, Matt brings up a really great tip. Pardon me? Oh, okay, there we have our answer. Okay. I don't know if that's a yay or a oh no, but probably a little bit of both.
I don't think
You don't need this survey anyway. I haven't worked, so it's a good argument not.
Okay. Okay, so now that that's around, and by the way, I know between the snow and trying to catch up and spring break coming, I'll do my best to get us out well before we have to worry about all of that. Okay, so back to worrying about updating, and whether or not can you be sued? And of course, you all will never be sued for that because you're going to have nightmares of me banging on the table for years to come. No, I'm only kidding. Anyway, but hopefully not. But more to the point. So I think, and as I said, Matt brings up a great point. And we all do this. We figure out our search terms, and then we get kind of stuck on those search terms rather than thinking about other ways of expressing that. So, of course, updating is part of research, which we discovered is one of the key terms. And the only way you can discover the key term is by doing the research and realizing that's what they use. Anybody else remember where they were confused, those of you who were here? Pardon me?
I agree. It was like at first I was
I also went for the key search. I went for the key case method, which now I recognize on Westlaw it's just a lot easier to go through the key number. If at first don't see, I mean, I don't know, for me, if at first don't succeed, at least if you went, I think that if I went to the thing, I would have been able to navigate and get something relevant that would have indicated search terms that would have been more helpful than what I did.
once he got the key.
Right, I think, yeah.
Well, of course, the point of the exercise is to show you, hey, these keys can be really useful. And I obviously already knew that that key was there, and you can't know that, obviously, ahead of time that that key is there. And for those of you who weren't here, what we're talking about is the keys, I think is what you're all talking about. So here on the Westlaw homepage, we have this Tools tab that we haven't looked at too much, and on the very top is the West key number system. And this is essentially the table, what I like to think of as the table of contents of the key number system. So you have the overall topics, and by the way, this system is set up like a street address. So you have a street, like you have Fifth Avenue, and there are a whole lot of different addresses on Fifth Avenue. So for me to tell you, oh, go to so-and-so store on Fifth Avenue, you'd spend a lot of time trying to figure out where that store was, walking up and down however many miles Fifth Avenue is. If I, however, tell you, go to 735 Fifth Avenue, you know exactly where to go. So think of these topics as the street name. So in looking at this, you might discover either from your initial search that wasn't great, but you might discover, oh, look, there is an attorney and client topic. There we go. There's an attorney and client topic. And then in looking at the street address, the numbers, like 175 or whatever number I just said on Fifth Avenue, 175 is good enough, you can see the actual key number. And again, I think of it as a table of contents because I can scroll down and see, okay, what do we have here? The Office of Attorney, that's an overall subheading, retainer and authority, duties and liabilities, that's probably where we need to go, and I can scan through here and discover, oh look, research and knowledge of law. So folks who, and superseded precedent is a perfectly good explanation of that topic. It's just not the terminology that's used by this particular system, or as it turns out, is probably used in too many of the judicial opinions. And it's figuring out what that language is. So one way to do it is keyword search, and as Matt says, then try as best you can to be flexible in trying other terms. Another way is taking a look at a topical table of contents like we have here in the key number system. Any questions about that? Any thoughts on areas that confuse you about issue spotting, or those of you who are here confused you on Friday about issue spotting? Okay. So if that's the case, what we will do is turn to the new material. And as I said, I know it's the class before spring break, and I know there's snow coming, either 12 inches or no inches, and there's no school tomorrow. So what I'm going to try to do is highlight what I think would really be useful to remember if you can next year, the following year, when you're practicing. And one of the what we're talking about today mostly is forms and finding forms. When I started practicing way back while the earth was still cooling, I did not know that there were such things as form books, or these days, forms available online. And so it was a little bit embarrassing when my supervising attorney had to say, oh, Lisa, go look at this form, their book right here, look, there's a form right there. I didn't even know this thing existed. So I want to save you from that embarrassment. If you have to draft a form, if you have to draft a complaint, if you have to draft a lease, there are forms out there to get you started. Now, maybe you're all looking at me saying, I know that already, which, good for you. So we will talk about strategies on how you might find them. And the first strategy is wherever you are working, see if there's some sort of form bank, file, some organization, some services, as we'll see, Bloomberg calls them precedents. We're not talking about case law precedent. We're talking about precedents of forms used by your particular organization in the past. There's a whole area now in law firm practice of knowledge management because everything's online these days. So certainly larger organizations have electronic means of keeping track of the forms that they use and the documents that they use. So see what sort of knowledge management system your particular organization has and whether or not they have a particular form that they like to use for complaints, for leases, for you name it in terms of whatever other form you have to draft. The challenge with forms is finding them online with a keyword searching can be tricky, and you're going to see an example of that in just a couple of minutes. So sometimes actually going to the book in the old-fashioned index, looking up in the index the form you need, and then finding the form online, because it's much easier to fill it out online, might not be a terrible strategy. But like us all, you're going to go online first because it is easier, and believe it or not, I'm all with you doing the easy thing first, if it works. So, of course, the first place you're probably going to go to is Google. And Google is fine as long as you find what you need, but don't think you're going to find it, because a lot of times what you will pull up on Google is some organizations like LegalZoom offering you forms for money, which means sometimes that's not such a bad thing either to pay $15 for a form that you need. But that's probably, in terms of representing clients, not the best way to go. So a couple of things you'll want to check for that you may not already know about, and that is if you are going on Lexis and Westlaw, and again, be aware on Lexis and Westlaw, this can be expensive. It depends on your plan and whether forms are included. And what I was hoping to pull up was, so one way of finding forms is if you are already within an issue, a topic that involves a statute. So I'm trying here on Lexis to pull up just a section of the CPLR, which has to do with the statute of limitations. And one thing you'll notice, our very best friend, our annotated code, has a section on forms. And what Lexis will do for us is it will actually, if there is a form that is a standard form used within a particular statutory section, Lexis will just show it to you right there, as we can see in this particular section. The equivalent on Westlaw is, all right, we'll pull it up this way. CPLR24. There we go. So this is the exact same section on Westlaw. Westlaw doesn't put the form in the section itself. What Westlaw will do for you here in context and analysis, again, there's area for forms, is Westlaw has and West has a separate section called McKinney's Forms. And again, that's also in print. We can, of course, do a keyword search on both services. So if we go back to our favorite search, and this would be true, you would see a section on the forms. This would be true on Lexis as well. Okay. You will, I hope, remember in our secondary sources, ALR, the encyclopedias, you will often see other research references. Sometimes there are forms there as well. That's a good way, especially in the treatises that are subject specific. That's a good way to find good forms. What I'm going to focus on now are some special tools on Lexis and Westlaw for finding forms, again, because it can be pretty tricky. And what Westlaw has done for us, it's got a whole section here on forms, and it's got its form finders. So you can narrow by topic, you can narrow by jurisdiction. If you have a particular favorite publication, you can search that as well. Let's go with jurisdiction because I think probably that's what you'll want to do most frequently. An example I always use, because I get this question a lot at the reference desk, is looking for an engagement letter. Again, you have a client walk into your door, that's always a good thing, and you need to provide, if you come to an agreement to represent that client, you need to provide her or him an engagement letter. And what I find is so tricky about finding forms is you can find them with your terms, but they're always supremely specific. So if your client is a new business, you're in luck. That's great. And you can see you have the form here. You can download this. It's got the blank lines for you, and it gives you an idea of some of the language you want to include. Obviously, you can add or take out as is appropriate for your particular situation. But say our client walked into your door, as she did way back in the beginning of the semester. She's got a new business. She wants to sue an HMO. So again, I keep on emphasizing this particular technique. Take a look at the table of contents. Even though she's not a new business, at least it's an engagement letter. If you take a look at our table of contents, you can see that there is, so we're looking at the small business client, so that might not be the best, or small business entity, so that might not be the best title for our client. So you might then know, okay, I need to look elsewhere. But again, the table of contents will give you, let's get back there, will give you a whole list of options that may or may not help you. Even if she's not a small business, maybe you want to take a look at what this form has to say about using a flat fee, and give you ideas for standard terms of engagement for legal services. Now that's California, so it's not going to be good for New York. But again, you can see using the table of contents, you might find something that's useful. The other special feature Westlaw provides us, and this is actually relatively new, is this doc and form builder. And you can get to this a couple of different ways. But if you see the link here, it's actually going to ask me to, it's a separate part of Westlaw, I guess. It may ask you to sign in separately. You use your same sign-in that you use typically for Westlaw. And so here it brings up the document that we were looking at. Let's get back here to Westlaw and resume. To find a form on the Doc and Form Builder, if we go here to Form Finder, here on the right. Again, this is a pretty good video to give you some of the details that we won't go into. Again, if we narrow by jurisdiction, we can narrow by type of matter. And then even just scrolling here, I can see here there's a new client letter. So this would probably be more appropriate for our particular client in terms of suing the HMO. Okay, let's go back to Westlaw. We will be talking about the Practice Ready tools after spring break. It's another area to find forms, but it does other things as well. So I think it would be more appropriate then. But just to let you know, we will be looking at that. On Lexis, let's get to the top. Lexis also has a special area for forms, and again, you can narrow. Probably a good idea to narrow by jurisdiction, but not necessarily always. And just as you do with everything else on Lexis and Westlaw, you can do a term search for your particular form. We'll try something on the litigation side, just to give you another perspective. So if we're looking for a breach of contract and I want to find a complaint, just a basic complaint, breach of contract. Here's actually a good example of why finding forms can be so tricky, because you'll see they're incredibly specific on exactly what the cause of action is and the type of client, and it can get fairly tricky. One of the aspects on Lexis that I like about Lexis's form finder is it actually gives me a filter on form type. So as I said, if we want a complaint, I can at least narrow it to just looking for a complaint. And then what I might do is narrow further by the source. So looking here and guessing which source might be good, I can guess, or hopefully you can guess fairly easily, forms of pleading for the state of New York sounds like it probably is a good source for complaint, as opposed to just general forms on the consolidated laws. But do your best to guess on the format, and again, you'll get this like very specific list of complaints that really may or may not be useful for your particular circumstance. So again, what I might do is go to one of them, even though I know it's not useful. And again, you have to be careful about costs on this, again, depending on your plan. And again, viewing the table of contents. And so what I see is our particular very specific forms, and there are a whole bunch of really incredibly specific forms. So this has to do with warranty, which again, depending on your breach of contract claim, may or may not be useful. But I'll take a look, because I know this whole set is on forms, because it's forms of pleading. So I'll just take a look at a quick scan at the whole thing. And for instance, if I want something very simple or just to educate myself on what are the super basics of a complaint, again, scanning the table of contents, I can see here's just skeleton forms. So skeleton form of complaint, I can get just a very basic start if that's what I need. So with forms, again, it can be a little challenging doing a keyword search. And I would say the key is get as far as you can and then look at the table of contents. There seems to be a theme for the course. And again, on Lexis, there's another sort of practice tool that we'll be looking at after break called Practice Advisor. Whoops, that's not where I wanted to go. And Practice Advisor is there. We're not going to look at it today. We'll look at it after break. But I just wanted to highlight that for you now as another way to locate forms. Now, Bloomberg is interesting. We've been kind of giving Bloomberg the cold shoulder because we like Lexis and Westlaw better, justifiably, I think. But when it comes at least to business drafting, Bloomberg actually can be pretty powerful. And what you will see here, a couple of ways of going there. Transactional precedents. As I mentioned, some places refer to forms as precedents, and Bloomberg turns out to be one. Further down, there's a whole range of different transactional resources for you. So, looking at transactional precedents, Bloomberg pops up its search box, and you can see you could search all types. And again, this is going to be transactional, so it's going to be business-oriented, M&A, equity. So you can just type in your keywords, or you can view by document type. So maybe some of you will be in the real estate area, if I recall correctly. You might be looking at leases. So you can either just search all of leases or narrow down to particular types of leases, because obviously you can lease property, you can lease equipment. So I might want to narrow to real property, and I might want to say, well, I want to see what you have for apartment leases. And basically, you can narrow further if you choose, but you get those forms. The other thing I want to point out here on the search box with Bloomberg, if it'd be nice enough to pull it up for us again. In addition to keywords and document type, you can search by industry, and specifically there's something called the SIC industry. There's something called the Standard Industrial Codes that is a way of doing research on different businesses using standardized codes. And pointing that out now because I'll show you a little bit more information about that in a little while. And as I mentioned, you can always try Google. Doesn't hurt. It's free. So if we go back to our engagement letter example, it's very hit or miss. And again, you might also pull up lots of examples where you get to services that ask you to pay money. Most of those are designed for non-lawyers to help them out. So you want to be really careful because you don't know what you're getting. But here's an example in typing in engagement letter. You might actually find something useful. And again, you want to use some of the tools we talked about in terms of evaluating websites. So here's the New York State Bar Association. And it talks about retainers, and it turns out there's another name for it, retainer agreement. So you actually might have more success in searching for that. But here at the New York State Bar Association, you can actually see that there are actually rules applying to that. And then you can click through and see if you can get to those particular forms. So here's a sample letter of engagement. So it turns out, at least with this example, doing a good old Google search, if it gets you to a good website, again, you need to be very, very careful in terms of what websites you're looking at. You might find something useful. Okay, any questions on...
You get it from a court website? Or do they not have
a court website is another good, reliable place to get forms. Well, I don't know that you can get an engagement or a retainer agreement at a court website. Possibly.
I guess the question is, then you have to take it and go to the court rules to see what you're doing. If the court has a separate rule. I'm asking a practical question. Let's say you find something great on Lexis, but that won't tell you the specific court. It's just a general form of pleading. Right? The court, the specific court.
Depending on the source, yeah, very likely it's it might be New York, but it might not be that court. Yeah, so absolutely, if you're practicing before a court, you want to find out if the court has specific forms. Hopefully it's on the web, no guarantee, but a lot of times actually the court clerk can be very helpful in at least letting you know you need to get a form. They might not give it to you, but they can at least let you know you need to get a form. But I would check the court website first, because these days, hopefully, more and more courts are getting that kind of material up on the web. But good question. Other questions? So we saw on Bloomberg the idea of doing drafting business forms. What I want to shift to now is to talk a little bit just about doing business research generally. This is obviously a legal research class, not a business research, but there are some concepts that I think can be particularly useful if you wind up representing businesses or suing businesses or representing someone who has business interest. If you're in family law and unfortunately you're representing someone who's getting divorced and there's a business involved in the properties, it's good to have some idea of some of these business concepts. You probably have had a lot of these in other classes, so I will be going rather quickly on that assumption. But if not, let me know if you have questions. So do you all understand the difference between public and private companies? Issuing shares, privately held. Okay. So researching private companies can be getting information on them can be quite difficult. That's not true, however, for public companies because, of course, they're governed by the Securities and Exchange Act. So there are a number of ways to do that research. And there are quite a lot of databases. We have a whole lot, quite a number of them, rather, here at the business school. And again, as alum, you'd be welcome to come back and do research here on those databases. You may have access to some of those business databases if you get your public library card, as I encouraged you a month or two ago. A lot of those business databases are available through the public libraries. So in using those databases and doing research generally, one of the concepts that actually I just referred to was the SIC number, the Standard Industrial, I think it's Standard Industrial Company. Doesn't matter. It's SIC. And basically what the SIC numbering system does, it just divides every industry and assigns them a number. Standard Industrial Classification. I knew I was going to get that right. Okay, so if we scroll down, you see a whole bunch of different areas, and if we go down far enough, sure enough, we have for legal services, not that that would necessarily be the one you'd be searching, you'd probably be searching others, but just to give you an example. So you would be searching by 8111. I don't know if you can see that all the way in the back, but that's what this number is, 8111. So to do a search on the legal industry using the SIC code, that would be the SIC code. But what happened, and the SIC codes have existed for decades, and of course what's happened over decades is business and life has evolved. So we now have the internet and social media and all sorts of other new things that didn't exist back when these codes were generated. Now they've been added to and updated, but it was determined that we needed a new system. So the NAICS codes system was developed. And you can look up these codes by just Googling. So SIC codes, NAICS code is how I wound up here. And so the NAICS, NAICS, is a bit more detailed, North American Industry Classification System. And we can see there's professional, and we lawyers have our own number, 5411, 3 ones and a 0. And again, so one of these codes would be what you would plug into that Bloomberg form where I showed you that little field for SIC codes. If you wanted to search on Bloomberg for a particular industry and you knew its SIC code, you could plug it right in there. Likewise, some of these other business databases will also provide you with a field for searching either SIC or the NAICS code. And you can go here on the web to look them up. Okay, in terms of tools that we have available to you, and maybe you will wherever you wind up, again, our good friend Bloomberg is really good for just straight business research. Now, Bloomberg has a separate business database, the Bloomberg terminal that it became famous for, and I think where Michael Bloomberg made all his billions. Bloomberg Law is actually quite new for Bloomberg, so you may have the Bloomberg terminal available to you. I have never used one, but I understand it's quite cool. But even if you just have Bloomberg Law, excuse me, there's a lot of interesting business tools here. So here on our browse, there's a whole section on business intelligence. And I find there's a whole lot here. I could spend probably 2 classes just on the business stuff on Bloomberg. I won't, don't worry. But one of the cool ones I think is worth showing, the report writer. If you need to have some if you need to produce something about a particular company, a client you're going to represent, you name it, someone you're interviewing for, you can look them up on this report writer, and basically if you can find our ticker symbol or look it up here on the web. I actually downloaded one earlier for Facebook, so just to show you what that looks like. Now it's going to make me generate it again. That's okay too. And it'll let us know when that's ready. And while we're waiting for that, let's go back here on Bloomberg because I'm going through this really quickly. So I wanted to make sure you knew about Bloomberg has a lot of video tutorials on how to use all of this. So you can go here to their help center. So our download is ready. I'm going to So I'm flipping back and forth here. I hope I'm not confusing you too much. So we're going to go look at our report, and then we'll go look at the Help Center, hopefully. Oh, it's making me sign in again. That's not very nice of it. That's what you get for multitasking. I'm not sure why it's bouncing me back like that. But anyway, let's take a look at the Help Center. So you can see there's just a whole lot of tutorials on basically what we've already talked about, general research, but also on these specialized business resources as well. Okay, I'm going to try one more time to pull that up, and if we don't get it, then I will give up. So let's actually go back here. View all downloads. Okay, no, I'm not running into. There we go. So here's what a company report looks like. It's rather very detailed information with graphs on your particular company. So that's one way to do business research on a company if you have Bloomberg available to you. If you don't, and you don't have access to these business databases, I don't find Lexis or Westlaw particularly useful. And again, that's also the kind of material that's going to be really expensive if it's not in your plan. I actually think you are better off going to what's available on the web. So for instance, here on Google, if you wanted to find out about a particular company, and I'm using Facebook as my example, it's been in the news lately, I can Google, actually I don't even need the word Google, but Facebook annual report, and like many major companies and certainly public companies, more questionable on private companies, you'll find a lot online. And what I would recommend is tracking down the annual report, also known as the 10K. For those of you who've taken securities, you've probably learned about the different SEC documents. So let's see, I'm not doing real well in downloading today.
Do you have any Edgar advice?
I find Edgar to be super confusing on Lexis and Westlaw, with the exception if you want to do a keyword search across everybody's Edgar filings. And there are reasons you might want to do that. It actually could pull up some forms that way. You could get some other sort of data mining information. What I would recommend, and actually you anticipate me, so I'll just jump over there. The SEC site has, under this Filings tab, it's got a lot of useful information. Under the Filings tab, I find particularly useful how to search Edgar. Actually, this site, this how to search site, is actually a really nice securities research tutorial, not just for this website, but just what some of these forms are and do. And you can see it's fairly, the research guide here is fairly extensive. The other advice I would have is, again, depending on where you're starting and what you need, the forms list is actually pretty useful in just listing what the forms are. I mean, I, for one, can't keep track. I remember 10K, and that's about it. And so when I get a reference to 4Q, or you can see there's a whole list of them here, I just take a look at the forms list just to see what it is I'm looking at. So that would be my Edgar advice. Other questions? Okay, apologies for that slight snafu on our recording. So another aspect of research, both business research and non-legal research, is going to be factual research. And by factual research, I'm thinking statistics. So if you find yourself having to do any kind of data or statistical analysis for business or otherwise, a couple of good resources: Bureau of Labor Statistics, as well as the Census Bureau, not surprisingly. They collect all that data, and there are huge amounts of data available both from a business and economy perspective, as well as other aspects of statistics that you might expect to find from that's covered by the census. So obviously population, housing, income, and all of these can have relevance to many different practice areas of the law, again, depending on what your issue and who you're representing. Okay. So I have about 15 minutes more. Should we forge ahead, or? Okay, so the last area, kind of factual, business-oriented, but non-legal research, public records. And you will likely run into the need for public records in your practice at some point, whether you are securing a loan, whether you are looking to see if someone has a lien against them, whether you're seeking to put a lien against somebody. You will want to check the various public records. And there are typically companies and agencies that do this. A lot of law firms and other legal organizations have arrangements with their favorite local firm, whatever it is. So you may just do it that way, but it's good to understand, again, what you are looking at. And one way to see that is actually here on Lexis. And again, this may be supremely expensive depending on your plan, but I like to show it at least to give you a sense about what some of these are. Have any of you done UCC filing searches or talked about them? So if you have access to it, which we do on Lexis, and interestingly not on Westlaw, you can do a couple of different of these types of public records search. So for instance, judgment and liens here. You can do real property searches, uniform code filings. So just to take if you wanted to see what liens are against a particular individual. So you can see I've typed in an individual we've all heard about, our president, to see what liens he has either sought or has imposed. And I've put in the New York address, because you do need an address. And in taking it's kind of hard from the Lexis, what you see on Lexis, to distinguish what is what, so you kind of just have to look at them all. So just looking at this first one of the judgment and liens. So someone has executed a lien for $75,000 at filing date 2009. It's a little bit difficult here to tell whether this is still in effect or not. So looking here at the general UCC filings. So banks will do this if they're lending money to a business. So this is actually Donald Trump Jr., a particular UCC filing. kind of interesting also is the real property liens. Anytime you buy or sell real property, you need to keep track of it to make sure someone is actually the owner. To show you what that might look like. So here we see Fifth Avenue.